The bar was called Ember and Oak, and on Thursday evenings in late October, it smelled like wood smoke and overpriced Malbec and the particular loneliness of people who had somewhere better to be but had stopped pretending. Daniel Carter sat at a table near the window and watched a woman walk out. She'd been sitting across from him for 11 minutes. He knew because he'd checked his watch twice, once when she arrived 5 minutes late without apologizing, and once when she started putting on her coat. Her name was Laura something. He'd already forgotten the last name. She had brown hair and a firm handshake, and had asked intelligent questions about his work in architectural restoration for approximately 6 of those 11 minutes, right up until the moment he mentioned Sophie. Not even Sophie's full name, just the fact of her. I raised my niece for 3 years after my sister passed. Simple sentence, past tense, honest. The shift in Laura's expression was subtle enough that someone less experienced might have missed it. Daniel did not miss it. He'd seen it approximately a dozen times over the past 2 years, in coffee shops and restaurants, and once at a gallery opening. Each time, some variation of the same calculation happening behind someone's eyes. Single man plus child plus complicated history equals too much. "You seem like a genuinely good person," Laura said, which was how people ended conversations they'd decided to end. "I just don't think I'm in a place for." "You don't have to explain," Daniel said. She looked almost relieved. After she left, the waiter came by and asked if he was still waiting for someone. Daniel told him no. He ordered a second glass of Malbec he didn't particularly want and sat with it for a moment, turning the stem between his fingers. The candle on the table was one of those short, wide ones that drips down the sides of itself. He watched it do that for a while. He was not devastated. That was the thing that probably should have worried him more than it did. He was 36 years old, and he had been on enough of these evenings to know that the absence of devastation was not the same as being okay. It was more like a particular kind of quiet that settled in after you'd stopped expecting something. He reached for his jacket on the back of the chair. "Excuse me." The voice came from the table to his left. He hadn't noticed anyone there. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the voice continued. "Can I ask you something strange?" She was sitting alone with a glass of white wine and a leather portfolio that she'd clearly stopped working on some time ago. Dark jacket, dark hair pulled back in a way that looked deliberate but not effortful. She was watching him with the kind of direct attention that most people reserve for people they already know. Daniel said, "How strange." "Fairly," she said. He didn't move to leave. "You just got turned down because you have a child," she said. Not cruelly, not with any particular emphasis. Just as a statement of fact, the way you'd observed that it was raining. "I'm going to assume the acoustics in here are worse than I thought," Daniel said. "The acoustics are fine." She wasn't especially quiet about it. The woman picked up her wineglass and considered it. She said too much under her breath when she thought you weren't listening. "I heard it." Daniel looked at her for a moment. "You were eavesdropping on my date. I was sitting 3 feet away with nothing to read." "There's a difference." He almost smiled at that. "Almost. What's the strange question?" he said. The woman set her glass down. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, not nervous exactly, but measured, like someone who had rehearsed something and was deciding whether to go through with it. "I need a husband," she said, "by tomorrow afternoon." The bar noise continued around them. Someone laughed near the back. The candle on Daniel's table dripped wax onto the tablecloth. "That's either a proposal," Daniel said, "or the opening line of a very specific kind of scam." "Neither." She tilted her head slightly. "Although I understand why those are your first 2 options. What's the third option?" "An arrangement," she said. "Temporary. Specific terms. No deception involved, except to the extent that appearing at a family event with a presentable stranger constitutes deception, which I suppose it does." Daniel sat back down. Not because he'd decided anything, because the conversation had become too unusual to walk away from. "I'm Daniel Carter," he said. "Clara Whitmore," she said. "And before you ask, yes, The Whitmore Group. Yes, it's a significant amount of money. No, that's not why I'm sitting in a bar alone on a Thursday, asking strangers to pretend to be married to me. Why are you, then? She looked out the window. Amber leaves pressed briefly against the glass, and then were gone. Because, she said, all the people I know well enough to ask have opinions about it. He moved to her table, or rather, she picked up her wine and her portfolio and moved to his, because his had the better view of the door, and Clara Whitmore, he would come to understand this quickly, liked to see what was coming. The terms, she explained, were straightforward. Her family held what they called an annual gathering, which was a word that did not adequately describe a catered event for 40 people at her parents' estate in Lake Oswego. The gathering happened every year on the last Saturday of October. She attended every year. Every year, her mother asked variations of the same 3 questions about her personal life. Every year, her uncle, her father's younger brother, who had the personality of a man who had peaked at 32 and spent the subsequent decades defending that achievement, made comments about the improbability of a woman running a company successfully while remaining, as he put it, unclaimed. Unclaimed? Daniel repeated. He's 61 and he says things like that without irony, Clara said. I've considered having him arrested, but apparently that's not legal in Oregon, only in some counties. She looked at him to see if he was serious. He wasn't, but his face didn't show it. She seemed to appreciate this, the arrangement. He would attend the gathering as her partner. Long-term, she'd say, if asked no specific timeline. They'd met through mutual friends. He was in architectural restoration, which was interesting enough to generate conversation and grounded enough not to raise suspicion. They wouldn't need to invent elaborate backstory because the best cover, she'd found, was selective truth. They did meet tonight. They had been talking for some time. These things were not untrue. After the event, they would part ways. She would compensate him for his time if he wanted, though she acknowledged that was a strange thing to offer, and he might find it offensive. Do you find it offensive? She asked. Daniel thought about it. No, he said, but I'm not going to take it. Why not? Because then it becomes a job, and I've already had a bad day professionally. Her expression shifted slightly. Something that might, eventually, with proper lighting and context, become a smile. What happened professionally? Restoration project in Selwood. Client decided halfway through that they wanted to modernize the original crown molding. We've been arguing about it for 3 weeks. He paused. It's early 19th century plaster work. You don't modernize it. You restore it, or you leave it alone. Clara was quiet for a moment. What did you tell him? I told him I'd finish the job as contracted and never work with him again. That must have been satisfying. It was extremely satisfying and also extremely unprofessional. He picked up his wine. So? Tell me about your family. The thing about Clara Whitmore, Daniel noticed over the next hour, was that she gave information in layers. Not evasively, she wasn't lying or hiding, but deliberately, the way you pull thread from a spool when you want to control the tension. The surface layer. Her family was wealthy. Old Portland money, 3 generations of commercial real estate and timber holdings that had since diversified into technology infrastructure. Her father, Robert Whitmore, was 68 and had run the company until 5 years ago, when Clara had taken over. Her mother, Helen, was a woman who expressed love primarily through catering choices and social architecture. The middle layer. Clara was 34 and had built the Whitmore Group's technology division from a modest portfolio to its largest revenue segment. She had done this in 4 years. She had done it while managing a board that had initially given her the role, expecting to redirect the company from underneath her within 18 months. They had stopped trying approximately 14 months in. The bottom layer came when Daniel asked, simply and without particular strategy, "Do you like what you do?" Clara looked at him. "That's an unusual question," she said. "Is it?" Most people ask how I do it, or they ask what it's like. The like question is different. Do you want to answer it? She turned her wine glass in a slow circle. Yes, she said finally. I like it enormously. I like the problem solving. I like the scale of it. I like that when I make a decision, it ripples. She paused. I don't always like what it costs. What does it cost? She looked at him steadily. The assumption that everything in my life is a transaction, including relationships, including this conversation. Probably, from your perspective. It's not. You don't know me. No, Daniel said. But I've been sitting here for an hour, and you haven't once asked me what I do for the Whitmore Group or whether I have connections you should know about. People who treat everything like a transaction lead with that. Clara was quiet. Also, he said, you tipped the waiter 22% on a round of drinks. Transactional people tip exactly 15%. She looked at him with something closer to surprise than she'd shown all evening. You calculated that. I notice things. It's a professional habit. Architectural restoration. You read buildings the way other people read faces. After a while, you can't stop doing it to rooms. And then, to everything else. It was Clara's turn, and she knew it. Tell me about the child, she said. The niece. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did a minimal shift, shoulders lowering a fraction, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. Sophie, he said. She's 11 now, lives with my sister-in-law's family in Seattle. Good people, she's doing well. You say that like you're reassuring yourself, probably because I am. He looked at the candle. Her mother, my sister Renee, died 4 years ago. Aneurysm. Nothing predictable about it. Sophie was 7. Her father had been out of the picture since before she was born. He paused. I was the obvious choice. I was also the only choice. Was that hard? Some of it. He was quiet for a moment. The hard part wasn't the day-to-day. I liked having her around. I'm good with kids. The hard part was I was 32, and I had a 7-year-old, and I hadn't planned any of that, and the world treats you very specifically when you're a single man who didn't come by parenthood in the standard way. He glanced up. People assume things. Either you're saintly, which is uncomfortable, or you're suspicious, which is exhausting. And on dating apps, you're immediately categorized, he said. Yes. I stopped mentioning Sophie in profiles eventually, which felt dishonest. So then I stopped using profiles altogether. He shrugged. Tonight was a setup through a mutual friend who apparently didn't think to mention to Laura that I had, quote, a situation. Why did Sophie go to Seattle? Because she needed stability I couldn't fully give her. I travel for work sometimes. The restorations take me out of state. Her aunt and uncle have 2 kids her age, a yard, a school she loves. He set his glass down. It was the right decision. It was also the worst month of my life, and I made the decision anyway. Clara studied him for a long moment. The people who turned you down, she said, because of Sophie. Do you think they were wrong? I think they were honest, Daniel said. I'd rather someone tell me up front than 6 months in. That's very generous of you. It's not generous. It's practical. He looked at her. I'm not angry at Laura. I'm tired of the math. The math? The one where I get calculated, where the numbers don't add up and someone's face tells me I'm not worth the complication. He paused. I'm sure you know the math. She did. He could see that she did. When I was 28, Clara said, I was seeing someone. He worked in finance. We'd been together for almost 2 years, which at the time felt significant. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from the table's edge. One evening at dinner, he told me he thought I should consider taking a less prominent role at the company, not leave it entirely, just step back enough to give our relationship proper attention. What did you say? I told him I'd think about it. Did you? I thought about it for approximately 45 seconds and then called my assistant to have him removed from the building's guest access list. Daniel kept his expression neutral. That seems proportionate. The relationship was already failing. That was just the moment I admitted it. She folded her hands on the table. After that, the pattern became clearer. The men who weren't intimidated by the money were intimidated by the decision-making. The ones who weren't intimidated by that wanted to participate in it in ways that weren't appropriate. And the ones who seemed genuinely fine with all of it, those were the most exhausting, because I was always waiting for the moment they'd stop being fine with it. So, you stopped waiting. I stopped starting, she said. It's more efficient. Is it? She didn't answer immediately. Outside, a gust of wind sent a scatter of leaves against the window. They both watched it. I don't know, Clara said. I've been telling myself it is for about 3 years. And tonight? She looked at him evenly. Tonight I'm sitting in a bar asking a stranger to play a role at a family event, which suggests the efficiency argument may have some holes in it. Daniel laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one. It surprised him. It seemed to surprise her, too. It happened naturally, the way real arguments do not from anger, but from two people who were both more accustomed to being right than to being challenged, and who had, over the course of 2 hours, stopped being careful. It started with something Clara said. You've given up. Daniel looked at her. I'm sorry? The dating. Sophie. The way you talk about it. She wasn't being harsh. She was being precise, which was somehow more unsettling. You've decided the outcome in advance. You go through the motions, but the part of you that might be surprised, that's locked off. That's called learning from experience. It's called preemptive surrender, she said. There's a difference. You've known me for 2 hours. Yes, and in 2 hours, you've described 3 separate situations where someone's expectations of you didn't match reality, and in every case, your response was to internalize the mismatch rather than push back against it. She tilted her head. You told the client about the crown molding. You didn't tell Laura that her reaction was unfair. You didn't tell the apps that their framework was wrong. You pushed back at work, but nowhere that matters. Daniel was quiet for a moment. The waiter came by, and Clara waved him off. You're doing the same thing, Daniel said. I know, showing up to a family event with a stranger to avoid a conversation. That's not solving the problem. That's performing around it. I'm aware. Your uncle isn't going to change because you bring someone. Your mother isn't going to stop asking. You're buying a one-night solution to a structural issue. He looked at her. And yet you still want to do it. Yes, she said. Because sometimes you're not trying to solve the problem. Sometimes you're just trying to get through the night. The silence between them lasted 3-4 seconds. Fair, Daniel said. Clara looked down. I wasn't trying to be cruel. About the giving up. I know. He turned his wine glass once. The conversation after that was different. Not softer exactly. Clara didn't do soft as a baseline mode, but less armored. The way a room changes after a window opens. Same room, different air. They talked about Portland in the way people who actually live in a city talk about it, which is to say with specific affection and specific grievance. Clara had grown up in Lake Oswego, left for Boston for her MBA, come back and found the city had changed enough to feel both familiar and slightly foreign. Daniel had grown up in Southeast Portland, moved to Northeast when he started the restoration business, could name every building on Mississippi Avenue by their original purpose. The one with the copper roof, he said, on the corner of Skidmore that was a pharmacy in 1912. You can still see the original tile work in the entryway if you know where to look. Do you actually tell people that? Only people who ask. And do people ask? He considered. More than you'd think. Clara smiled at that, a real smile. Not managed, corners of her eyes involved. She told him about a project she'd been working on that had nothing to do with the Whitmore Group. A proposal she'd been quietly building for 2 years to convert a block of decommissioned commercial space in Jade District into a mixed-use development that actually served the neighborhood rather than displacing it. She talked about it with a different kind of energy than she'd brought to everything else, more animated, less controlled, hands moving slightly. "Does the board know about this?" Daniel asked. "The board would have opinions. Would those opinions be wrong?" She paused. "Most of them." "Yes. Are you going to do it anyway?" Another pause, longer this time. "I haven't decided." "What's stopping you?" "The same thing that stops most decisions," she said. "The difference between what something costs in theory and what it costs in practice." Daniel nodded slowly. He understood that particular calculation. He'd run it himself about Sophie more times than he wanted to count. The gap between knowing the right thing and absorbing what the right thing actually asked of you. "The Jade District project," he said. "Does it make you feel the way the company does? Or different?" Clara looked at him. "Different. Better or worse? Terrifying," she said. "Which I think is better." By 9:45, the bar had filled and emptied in that way. Thursday, bars do an early crowd of after-work people replaced by a later crowd of people who'd had dinner and were extending the evening. The candle on Daniel's original table had burned down completely. The one on this table was still going. They had been talking for nearly 3 hours. Daniel noticed this in a peripheral way. The way you notice the temperature has changed, not as an event, just as a condition. He could not remember the last time 3 hours had passed in a conversation without him checking his phone once. Clara had her phone face down on the table. She hadn't checked it either. "I should probably go," she said. "Probably," he said. Neither of them moved immediately. "The event tomorrow," she said. 2:00. "Lake Oswego. I was going to take the Whitmore car, but if you'd rather..." "You're still asking me." She looked at him steadily. "Were you under the impression I'd changed my mind? You said you didn't need it anymore." "About 2 hours ago, I said I thought I didn't need it anymore. I was reassessing." She picked up her portfolio. "You don't have to come." It was a strange thing to ask a stranger. I'm aware of that. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He thought about what she'd said about preemptive surrender, about locking off the part of yourself that might be surprised. He thought about Laura's expression, and the dozen expressions like it before hers, and the particular quiet that had settled into him somewhere along the way. "Tell me what to wear," he said. Clara looked at him. "The event," he said. "What's the dress code?" She was quiet for a half-second, then, "Business, casual. Dark jacket if you have one. Don't wear a tie, my father will think you're trying too hard." "What does your father wear?" A sweater his wife didn't pick for him, and an expression of mild, benevolent confusion. Something in her voice went slightly warmer. "He's actually very kind. He'll probably ask you about your work for 40 minutes. I can talk about restoration for 40 minutes. I know. That's why I'm telling you." She stood. He stood. They were both quiet for a moment in the way that happens at the end of something, when neither person is sure exactly what the something was. 2:00, she said. "I'll text you the address. You don't have my number." She held out her hand. He gave her his phone. She entered her number and texted herself from it. "Now you have mine," she said. "Now I have yours," he said. She picked up her jacket, folded it over her arm, took one step toward the door. "Clara." She stopped, turned. "The Jade District project," he said. "Do it." She held his gaze for a long moment. "I'll think about it," she said. She pushed through the door. Outside, the wind had picked up, and a small constellation of amber leaves scattered across the sidewalk behind her. Daniel drove home with the radio off, again. He lived in a converted carriage house in the Irvington neighborhood, a building he'd spent 2 years restoring before he moved in and had never quite finished to his own satisfaction. The original brass fixtures in the bathroom were period accurate. The kitchen had been entirely redone by a previous owner in a way that pained him every morning. He'd been meaning to restore it for 3 years and kept getting distracted by other people's buildings. He made coffee he didn't need, stood in the kitchen he hated, and looked at his phone. Clara Whitmore. Whitmore Group. He'd known the name without attaching it to a person. The company was significant infrastructure, data centers, the kind of operation that functioned in the background of a city's economy without being visible to most of its inhabitants. He'd worked on a building once that the Whitmore Group owned, a 1920s warehouse conversion in the Pearl District. Impeccable structural maintenance. Someone had been taking care of it. He thought about what she'd said about the Jade District project. The particular way her voice had changed, still controlled, but with something underneath it that was less managed. He'd seen that in clients sometimes, when they stopped describing what they wanted and started describing what they actually cared about. He thought about what she'd said about him. "You've given up." The thing was, she wasn't wrong. He'd known she wasn't wrong approximately 30 seconds into the accusation, which was why he hadn't defended himself more vigorously. There was a version of events where he'd internalized the math so thoroughly that he'd stopped questioning whether the math was right. Sophie had called him last Sunday. She was learning the recorder at school and had wanted to play him something. He'd listened to 4 minutes of an approximation of hot cross buns and told her it was extraordinary. She'd laughed and said, "Uncle Daniel, it's terrible, and you know it." He'd said, "It's extraordinary, terrible, which is a completely different category." She'd laughed harder. He loved her with a completeness that was not complicated by the grief or the disruption or the year he'd spent figuring out how to be suddenly responsible for a small human being. The love was simple. Everything else had been hard. He thought, maybe that's the thing. Maybe the love being simple made him think everything else had to be complicated. Maybe he'd been so accustomed to the hard parts that he'd started building them in advance. He set his coffee down and texted Clara. "Are you awake?" 3 minutes passed. "I have a question. Go ahead. The thing you said about performing around the problem instead of solving it. Do you think there's ever a good reason to do that?" He waited. "Yes. When you're not ready to solve it yet. Sometimes performing around it buys you time until you are. And if you never get ready, then the performance becomes the life." Which is its own kind of answer. He thought about that for a while. "See you tomorrow," he wrote. 2 o'clock, she replied. "Don't be late." My Uncle Clock's arrivals, Lake Oswego in late October, had the look of a place that had been decorated by someone with an unlimited budget and strong opinions about autumnal aesthetics. The Whitmore estate sat behind a low stone wall on a street lined with old-growth oaks, the kind of house that had been added to incrementally by people who had both the resources and the judgment to do it without ruining it. Daniel arrived at 1:58. Clara was waiting on the front steps. Dark green dress, dark jacket, hair down a different register than the night before, still entirely controlled. She looked at him as he came up the path. "Nice jacket," she said. "I own more than one." "I know." I was making conversation. She tilted her head slightly. "You're nervous." "I'm not nervous. Your left hand keeps almost going to your pocket." He looked at his left hand. It was doing exactly that. Force of habit. "I carry a measuring tape, keeps me from fidgeting at awkward job sites. You can borrow my pen. I'll manage." She studied him for a moment. Something shifted in her expression, brief, controlled, but there. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know this is strange. It got less strange over the course of last night." "Did it?" "Somewhat." She almost smiled. "Then let's go in before my uncle clocks us loitering outside." The gathering was exactly what she'd described. 40 people, exceptional catering, a level of ambient wealth that expressed itself through quality of materials rather than ostentation. Daniel recognized a craftsman-era built-in hutch in the entry hall that someone had taken excellent care of. He almost said something about it and stopped himself. Robert Whitmore was, as Clara had predicted, a man in a comfortable sweater with an expression of mild, benevolent confusion and a deep, immediate interest in architectural restoration. He cornered Daniel for 35 minutes. Daniel talked about the challenges of sourcing period-accurate materials in the Pacific Northwest, the particular difficulty of plaster work that had to match 19th-century formulations, a project in Eugene that had nearly broken him professionally. Robert Whitmore listened with genuine attention and asked follow-up questions that revealed he'd been quietly reading about historic preservation for reasons he explained as retirement planning. "What will you preserve?" Daniel asked. "The farmhouse my grandfather built in Yamhill County," Robert Whitmore said. "Nobody in the family thinks it's worth the trouble. I think it's worth every minute." "It probably is," Daniel said. Robert Whitmore looked at him for a moment. "Clara said you met through friends." "We did. She usually tells me more." "She usually tells you more about what?" "People." He said it without weight. "She's private. I understand that. But she's particularly private with people she actually likes." Daniel looked at him. "She showed you around when you came in," Robert said. "She only does that with people she's actually comfortable with. Everyone else gets a handoff to Helen." "I noticed the craftsman hutch in the entry," Daniel said. "She didn't tell me about it. I just stopped to look at it." Robert Whitmore smiled Clara's smile. Daniel realized. Same geometry, same quality of restraint. "That's her grandmother's. Won't let anyone touch it." Helen Whitmore was warm and relentless in equal measure, a combination that was neither unpleasant nor easy. She asked Daniel 3 questions about his work, 6 questions about his family, and 2 questions about his intentions toward her daughter that she phrased as questions about something entirely different, but clearly weren't. He answered all of them honestly. "Do you have family nearby?" "A niece in Seattle. We're close." "What do you think of Portland these days?" "I think it's a city that knows what it was and is figuring out what it wants to be, which is an interesting time to be here." "Do you find it hard to balance the travel that must come with your work?" "Yes. I've made decisions about it that I don't regret, but that cost something." "Most good decisions do." Helen looked at him after the last one for a moment longer than she'd looked at him after the others. The Uncle Gerald Whitmore, 61, exactly as advertised, made a comment at the buffet table that Daniel arrived next to just as it was leaving Gerald's mouth, something about Clara having finally come to her senses. Daniel did not respond to this. He took a piece of smoked salmon and offered the tongs to Gerald and waited. Gerald, deprived of reaction, moved on. Later, Clara found Daniel standing near the window that looked out over the back garden. The oaks were losing their leaves in slow motion. "Gerald found you," she said. "He found me at the buffet." "What did he say?" "Something that didn't require a response." She looked at him sideways. "You didn't say anything?" "Saying something would have been for me, not for you." He watched a leaf detach and fall in a long, lazy spiral. He wanted a response. "I didn't give him one. That's a better outcome." Clara was quiet. "My father told me you talked for 35 minutes about farmhouses," she said. 35 and a half, technically. "He hasn't talked about the Yamhill farmhouse to anyone outside the family in about 4 years." She said this, looking out the window, not at Daniel. "He showed you the study?" "He did. He never does that. He showed me the original blueprints, too. 1924. The draftsmanship is extraordinary." Clara turned to look at him then. Not the measured, strategic look she'd given him in the bar, something more unguarded. Like a window opening. "Thank you," she said, "for being this. I didn't do anything. You were genuinely here. That's not nothing." A brief pause. "Most of the people I've brought to things like this are performing from the moment they walk in. You're not performing. I told you I wouldn't." "I know." She looked back out the window. "That's what's strange about it." He drove her home. Not because it was on his way, it wasn't, but because she'd come in the Whitmore car, and at 7:15, when people were starting to leave, she appeared at his elbow and said, quietly, "If you're heading out, I'll come with you." They didn't talk much in the first 10 minutes. The city came up gradually as they came down from the hills. Lights reflected on the Willamette where they crossed the Selwood Bridge. Daniel kept his eyes on the road. Clara looked out the passenger window. You passed the building, she said. What? The building on Mississippi Avenue. With the copper roof? We passed it about 4 blocks back. He looked at her briefly. How did you know where it was? I looked it up this morning. She didn't explain why. He didn't ask. They drove. Gerald is going to say something next year too, Clara said. The year after that. Probably. Tonight didn't solve anything. Then what was the point? Daniel thought about this. Outside, the city moved past in amber and dark. You wanted to get through the night, he said. You got through it. That's not nothing either. Clara was quiet. And your father showed you the farmhouse blueprints, she said finally. He did. He's been wanting to start that project for 3 years. He doesn't know how to begin it. Tell him to call me, Daniel said. Yamhill County isn't far. I'd want to see the site before I made any recommendations, but from what he described, it sounds like the structural bones are sound. Those 1920s builds usually are, if they've been kept dry. Clara looked at him. You're offering to help my father's restoration project. He's interested. I'm interested. That's usually how it starts. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that they had turned off Barber and were coming up toward her, building a converted 1920s apartment block in the South Park blocks, impeccably maintained, the kind of building that made Daniel slow down involuntarily. Nice building, he said. I know. I bought the whole thing 5 years ago. She paused. The original copper gutters were still intact when I acquired it. I had them restored. Daniel looked at the gutters. They caught the streetlight. Those aren't copper-coated. Those are solid copper. I know what solid copper looks like. He stopped the car. They sat for a moment. Who did the restoration? He asked. A firm out of Eugene. They were adequate. She looked at the gutters. I always felt like they rushed the east corner. Daniel looked at the east corner. She was right. They did. The seam isn't quite clean. I've been meaning to have it addressed for 2 years. He looked at her. Don't, she said. Don't what? Don't offer to look at it. It'll make this. She stopped. Make it what? She looked at him directly, and for a moment her face was entirely unmanaged, not soft exactly, not vulnerable exactly, but real in a way that the rest of the evening, for all its genuine moments, hadn't quite been. It'll make it harder, she said, to treat this as the end of an arrangement. The car was very quiet. What if it isn't? Daniel said. She looked at him. The arrangement part, he said. What if that's just what it was called when neither of us had a better word for it? Leaves came down from the oak at the corner. 3, 4, scattered across the windshield and were taken by the breeze. That's a significant pivot from a stranger in a bar, Clara said. 3 hours in a bar, 4 hours at a family gathering. That's 7 hours. At some point, stranger stops being accurate. What would you call it instead? I don't know yet, he said. But I think the east corner of your building needs at least 2 site visits to assess properly, so we'd have time to figure it out. Clara looked at him for a long moment. That measuring look, the one from the bar but with something different underneath it now. Something that had been there all along, he thought, and was only now letting itself be visible. 2 site visits minimum, she said. That seems excessive for a gutter seam. The 1920s copper work in this neighborhood is more complex than it looks. Is that true? Mostly, he said. She pressed her lips together in a way that was definitely, unmistakably, the beginning of a smile. I have a meeting Monday morning, she said. But I'm free in the afternoon. Monday afternoon works. I'll need to be there for the assessment. That's standard, Daniel said. The owner's usually present. I'll bring coffee. That's not standard, but I won't object. She opened the car door. 1 foot on the curb, she stopped and looked back. The Jade District project, she said. What about it? I called the planning office this morning. Before the event. A pause. I scheduled a preliminary consultation. Daniel kept his expression level. Good. It was terrifying. You said terrifying was better. I did. She held his gaze for one more second. Monday, 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock. She got out. Walked up the front steps of the building with the solid copper gutters and the slightly imperfect east corner seam. At the door, she turned once and looked back at the car. Then she went inside. Daniel sat for a moment. Outside, the October dark lay over the city with that particular autumn weight, not cold enough to be winter, not warm enough to pretend otherwise. A single leaf came down from the corner oak and settled against the windshield without drama, the way important things sometimes did. He drove home with the radio off. And this time the quiet was different from the one he'd driven home in the night before. He noticed that. He noticed it the way he noticed seam lines in copperwork and load-bearing walls and the particular grain of old-growth wood, the way you noticed things that would matter later, that would require attention, that were worth the time to get right. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening, Sophie called from Seattle. "Uncle Daniel," she said, "are you okay? You sound different." "Different how?" he asked. A pause. Then, with the particular precision of an 11-year-old, "Like you're not doing the thing where you make everything sound fine." He laughed, a real one, the kind that had become more frequent lately, the kind he'd stopped noticing he'd been missing. "I'm fine," he said. "Actually fine." What happened? He thought about a bar in October, a woman with a leather portfolio and a glass of white wine and a question that was strange enough to be worth answering. A family gathering in Lake Oswego.